continue to be here and to bring the best of speakers, both Jewish and Christian, to be amongst us each time we meet. And it's wonderful just that we can stand together in these times, which we need to. Again, we're joined by our founding rabbi, Rabbi Isaac Riesenberg, who, together with myself and a guy called Peter Kentley, were part of the early stages of developing this Zoom call and monthly meetings. And we've been joined by many Christian and Jewish organisations around the country. So welcome, Rabbi. Good to have you with us. Please open and welcome people.
Yeah, thank you so much, John, and welcome to everybody who's joined us this evening. This will be our last program for the Jewish New Year, because in 2.5 weeks' time we will be celebrating Rosh Hashanah. We'll be entering the new Jewish New Year. We're currently in 5786 and we're travelling to 5787. Particularly, I'm looking forward to hearing a good old friend, Tom Krulis, share his story. So welcome, Tom, and together with Matthew Chivers, who has just recently returned from a very meaningful trip with a group of Christians to Poland and the concentration camps. I always do like to share a reflection about events in the current Jewish calendar, and there are certainly some very meaningful events occurring at this particular time. In the Hebrew calendar, we just began the Hebrew month of Elul. From the first day of Elul, which we call Rosh Chodesh, 40 days later, we conclude with Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. Very meaningful days because 10 days before Yom Kippur, we have Rosh Hashanah and the 10 days of repentance. So it's a time of reflection on our own lives, our relationships with others, and certainly our relationship with God. Where do these days draw their meaning? And here too we draw upon that great biblical story, seminal story of Moses ascending to Mount Sinai. You know the story well. He travelled up Mount Sinai, was at the top of the mountain for 40 days, received the 2 tablets of the 10 commandments from God, and then he returned, saw the Jewish people worshipping a golden calf, and he smashed the tablets. Let me share with you, the story does not end there, In fact, it continues, because in fact he went up for another 40 days, achieved forgiveness for the Jewish people, and then he actually went up for a third time. He went up on Rosh Chodesh Elul, the first day of Elul, stayed there 40 days, returned on that 40th day with the second set of tablets, and that day, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, has been enshrined in the Jewish calendar as a day of forgiveness, a day of fasting, a day of reconciliation. Just as a side point, what you may not know is that certainly those second set of tablets were then put in the Ark of the Covenant, which was the holiest artifact in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, but also those broken tablets, the tablets that Moses broke, were also gathered together and put into the Ark. And there's profound meaning there. At times we tend to disregard the brokenness, the struggle, the challenges in our lives. By Moses putting those broken tablets next to the whole tablets inside the Ark of the Covenant, he's saying to us, the struggles that we have, the challenges that we have are also holy and are also part of our lives to make us whole once again and to make us spiritually grow. The mystics in the Kabbalah give a beautiful parable to the month of Elul, and they tell of a great king of old that had a kingdom. And traditionally, to gain access to the king, it was through the palace, and one had to go through the king's bureaucracy in order to have a valid reason in order to see the king. But once a year in the warm summer months, the king with his entourage left his palace, travelled to the countryside, and encamped in the fields, in the countryside, if you will. And naturally, in that informal setting, everybody had access. Everybody could come to the king and share with him their problems. But this was only a temporary phenomenon because he was only there for a short period, and then he would return to his palace, and access once again was challenging. So the mystics explain these days, in the month of Elul, are compared to the king in his relaxed state in the field, if you will, a time where all of us have easier access to the king, to God, with our own particular requests and challenges. So certainly an opportune time for us to speak to God with greater intensity and meaning. There's also a beautiful custom that every morning we blow the shofar in the synagogue. So I'm putting everybody on notice. This evening we are going to conclude with the blowing of the shofar. Now, I know many of you in your cupboards, in your drawers, in your closets have a shofar, even on your mantelpiece. So in between our speakers tonight, go grab that shofar. And tonight we'll conclude the evening with a rousing shofar blast to herald in the new year. May it be a good year for all of us, a year of good health, a year of family, a year of material prosperity, but primarily a year when there will be a true peace in the Holy Land and the Middle East. John.
Thank you, Rabbi. As usual, I learn something every time you tell a story. That little extra part of the third 40 days that comes to mind. So thank you once again. It's great to have you with us. Tonight, the Rabbi has said, we've had some news, some mix-up news that our good friend or our good friend to be, Professor Amos Nadan, is not able to be with us tonight. It wasn't his fault. It was a mix-up in our communication. But by bonus, we managed to get Matt Chivers, who's actually one of our members of the board of advice, etc., for SCAFI, to come on, who has just travelled back with Bridges from Peace from being in Poland and Israel. So we'll have him as our second speaker tonight and to share some of the journey that he's been on. So that was a real bonus. We weren't expecting to have Matt back, and hopefully he's recovered from his journey just back. I know when I'm coming back from Israel, it almost takes 2 or 3 days to a week for me to recover after all the activity. So great to have you with us, Matt. But tonight we really are going to start off with one of our good friends and part of the board of advice, Mark Woodry, to introduce our friend Tommy Krulis. And Tommy, I just remembered back in my days of Blackburn and Lockwood, we used to do business with Godfrey's as our preferred supplier. And I think I actually did meet you there many years ago. But Mark, over to you to introduce Tom as we start tonight's meeting.
Good evening, beloved sisters and brothers. It's a privilege to introduce Tommy. As John alluded to, Tommy is an internationally regarded businessman, and I first met him only a few weeks after my first trip to Israel, which was a few months after October 7th. And my friendship with Tommy began with tears as he shared about his father, a Holocaust survivor. And then we tried to catch up with Tommy for ages in Melbourne or Adelaide, and it wouldn't work. And then we caught up in Jerusalem, and then we went to one of the kibbutzim and we bumped into him again. So it's wonderful, Hashem's divine providence and how he makes things happen that need to happen. One of the many things that Tommy has accomplished is the work in reviving and restoring and creating Holocaust museums. I happened to visit the one that he was instrumental in creating in Rwanda, the Holocaust Museum, alongside part of the Genocide Museum in Rwanda. It gives extraordinary lessons that we could well do now, learn now, as to what's happening in Australia. And Tommy has put together a wonderful book, and I'm just going to share a couple of paragraphs from that book about his father. So Tommy writes in the foreword, "My father Stephen was my hero, not just to me, but to everyone who knew him. He was kind, generous, strong, principled, and very funny. And somehow, after everything he endured, never carried an ounce of hate in his heart. I find that extraordinary. His story isn't just a survival story, it's one of the greatest survival stories I've ever heard. He lived through Theresienstadt, survived Auschwitz, came back from the brink of death multiple times, escaped communism, lost his family, his health, his youth, and everything he once knew. And yet he came out the other side with grace, humor, dignity, and with love for the world." That's how Tommy describes his father, and that's how I would describe Tommy, and I commend him to you.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. It's a great honor to be here in front of our good friends and people that have a shared vision of what Israel is and what the Jewish people are. And we're very grateful, and we thank all of you for your support. I wasn't quite sure what Mark wanted me to cover, but I start with a quote that evil prospers where good men and good women remain silent. And that quote was the beginning of my impetus that started when my children did March of the Living many years ago and went to the visit of the camps before they went to Israel. It's a famous journey that lots of 16-year-old, 17-year-old Jewish kids around the world take up. And when my eldest daughter came back, she was very traumatized with a visit at Auschwitz. And she came back and she wanted to try to find any history of my father who survived Auschwitz. And that led to a long journey because this was a long time ago. And what happened was that her boyfriend at the time across the road took upon himself to go back to Poland, to go to Auschwitz and look at the archives and see if they could find any connection to my father's stay there, which was really a long shot. But a miracle happened, and I don't know if we can see this, but I'll show you a photo. Can you? It's sorry, because of the zoom. Oops. I think you can see that. I mean, you won't see it very well, but there's a photograph of a suitcase in Auschwitz with my father's name on it, Tom Krulis, and his birth date, 1929. And they're able to track this in a book, which then came back to me. And not only was the photograph of the suitcase there, but also was a footnote about my father's Holocaust journey. And in it, it says that he arrived in Theresienstadt when he was 13 years old and spent 2 years in Theresienstadt, which was a Czech concentration camp, a holding camp, which in itself, I don't know if anybody knows the history of Theresienstadt. It was a garrison that was supposed to hold 30,000 people, and they had 150,000 people there, and people had typhoid and diphtheria. A lot of people died, but it wasn't an extermination camp. But then it says in this little footnote here that in October 1944, he got transported to Auschwitz. And we then knew that he had this suitcase with him with his name on it. And that was the that's what happened when you were in a concentration camp and you were deported to the next camp. You were basically told that you have to report to transport the next day, get on a train, take a suitcase, and put all the things that you've got there to take, and to go to the next destination where you go. Now, all of us know that when you think of a suitcase, you think of a happy experience that you're going on a holiday somewhere, that you're taking and you're going to visit someplace. But of course, that wasn't the case during the Holocaust. You basically took a suitcase like that and you put everything that you could think might keep you alive for an extra period of time wherever you were going to go. So you'd had all your hopes and aspirations were in that suitcase. And what's interesting is that the journey then continued. That after I'd seen that photograph, I said, of course, that I want to go back and see that suitcase sometime in my life. And I attempted to go several times. I couldn't go during COVID and things that stopped me. But eventually, you can see my self photo, probably not clearly. I don't know if you can see it at all. I'll talk to you about this book in a minute. But there am I holding that suitcase, if you can see that. Same suitcase in Auschwitz by myself a couple of years ago. And I got to hold the suitcase, look inside it. There was nothing in there. But I'd never sort of been closer to my Jewishness than at that moment, holding that suitcase in Auschwitz and thinking about the incredible significance of that moment. And my father already passed away 15 years ago. So all I did was have this suitcase, and it made me think about the miracle as a 15-year-old boy surviving and being Theresienstadt 2 years, and really what a miracle it was that I was ever born. And it also made me think about his survival instincts, and it motivated me to come back from that trip and think about honoring my father by writing a book about his story. And that's the book. And again, you'll see that. Let me just see with my blurring thing there. Oops, and that. You can see, there it is. I think you can see it's called The Boy with a Suitcase. And there's a photo holding the suitcase with the train coming. And I decided that I would write that book in honor of my father. Now, if anybody wants the book, Mark, you can write to Mark Mudry, one of your members there. And it's my mitzvah to send anybody a copy of the book. I don't charge people for the book. And the reason I wanted to write that book is that, how I could write that book, I wasn't an author myself, but I said, I'm going to write this book. And it required 3 parts to it. The first one is that I need to say something else as well. I don't know how many of you met Holocaust survivors, but most Holocaust survivors are reluctant to talk about what happened to them during the Holocaust. And my father was the same. He never, ever mentioned anything about his Holocaust experience. It was too painful for him to relive and too painful for him to transfer it to his children, that they would have to think about what he'd suffered in that time. And when he got to Australia, he really wanted to put all that behind him. And it's a very common situation. But of course, the problem is that he was a witness to the terrible event, and we need the testimonies as part of a defense of hoping that we never have another Jewish Holocaust. And we experienced terrible times the last few years, and so probably it's even more important that the testimonies are preserved. So the rest of the next part of that story that I need to tell you is that he didn't want to talk about it at all. And he had a sister who was Jewish on the mother's side. I won't get into that too much, but she survived. She was never taken to concentration camp. But my grandmother, who was Jewish, she was murdered in Auschwitz. And my grandfather, my grandfather, unbeknown to my father earlier, adopted my father. He wasn't Jewish. His original father was Jewish, but his second father was not Jewish. He was an atheist, and he adopted my father. And my father didn't even know he was Jewish. And my mother never told him he was Jewish, never told him that she was Jewish. And they hid it from him until the day he had to wear a Star of David, because the Nazis had records and they knew, and they knocked on the door. And my step grandfather was forced to tell him that, one, he actually had a father before him, 2, that he was Jewish, and 3, that he now had to wear a Star of David, but that he loved him with everything that he had, and he would do everything to help him. So you can imagine how complicated a realization it was to be Jewish in those circumstances in 1938. If we fast forward to coming back to Australia, is that his sister and him, he obviously survived, and his sister and him, he smuggled her out of communist Czechoslovakia in 1950, and they came to Australia as refugees, and they had a very wonderful life, like so many refugees and Holocaust survivors that came to Australia. But one day she said to him, look, there's a Holocaust exhibition on, please can we go together? And he'd never told his own sister about his Holocaust experience, and there was an exhibit there, and they had an exhibit of Auschwitz there. And my father said to his sister, look, that was the building, that was the building, that's what happened here and here and here. And they went for coffee afterwards, and she begged him to tell him about his Holocaust experience, which he then did. And she broke down hysterically in tears. And then it dawned on him that he couldn't be silent about it, that he owed history and I think his family and his survival to, it had to be codified in some way. And so he told her the story, and then of course he had the opportunity to do the Shoah testimony videos I don't know if any of your members know about the Shoah Foundation. Can I ask, do you know the Shoah Foundation? You know the details of that? I'll just give you one little aside. I hope there's not too much for you, but I think it's an interesting story. Some of you may know Schindler's List, the movie that was made by Steven Spielberg. And just for your members, I think you'd be interested to know this, is that Steven Spielberg had a rule that you were never allowed on his set, obviously, to interrupt him, except there was one exception. If you're a Holocaust survivor, you could come onto Schindler's List and interrupt him. And whilst he was filming Schindler's List, a little old lady came up to him and said, look, Mr. Spielberg, it's wonderful that you're making this film, but what will happen to the testimonies and the memories of all the survivors from the concentration camps? Who's going to keep their memories alive? And Steven Spielberg he dropped what he did straight away. He called over his producer and he said, how many people are alive are there that we could potentially get the testimonies? And I think there was probably about 80 or 90,000, I think. And he basically then committed to send a camera crew anywhere in the world to capture the testimony, unedited, of any numbers of people that would give testimony. And he ended up getting more than 50,000 testimonies, which is the Shoah Foundation, probably the most important Jewish today modern collection of memories and information about what happened to the Jewish people. And they're all kept in Yad Vashem, and you can download them. You've got to it's a privacy issue, but you can get them via Yad Vashem, etc., etc. So he did the testimony, and that was probably the most important history and memory that I have of his life. And so when I came back from Auschwitz with this memory of the suitcase, I committed to write his story, but there was 3 things I needed to do. One, I had his Shoah testimony. Second thing is I hired an author to write the book, a non-Jewish person called Bernadette Schwert, who was very keen to do a Holocaust story. She's a business author, but in this case, she really wanted to do something for the Jewish people and for my father when I told her the story of my father's life. And I was very lucky that my auntie, even though my father had been gone 15 years, she was 90 years old and she was still very much with it. And she lived in Sydney. And she had a non-Jewish father. That was my adopted grandfather. And she had my grandmother who was Jewish. She was a product of those new union. And I had to get her agreement to tell the author my father's early history, because I didn't know until he was 14 his life in Prague. Well, I knew about his background. And she was very broken because, and this is another thing that happened to people, that even if they weren't in concentration camps, there were many people who were broken from the experience of the Holocaust, because she was actually orphaned by the time she was 14. She had no parents. Her mother was murdered in Auschwitz and her father died of throat cancer as a broken man. He was, from interesting reflection, he was one of the most famous people in Czechoslovakia. He was a bridge builder, the most famous bridge builder in Europe. He had 5,000 employees and he built bridges and tunnels all through Europe. We don't know how she managed to survive and not be taken, but we suspect he was made to cooperate with the Nazis in keeping her life alive. We never knew that for sure, but that's what my auntie suspected. So I sent Bernadette to meet my auntie, and I said, look, I need her to agree, even though she's tried to write a book about her life, to tell the story of my father's early life and what happened to him before the Holocaust. And I also got Bernadette talked to her if we could write her life story. So if you like, I sponsored writing 2 books, her life story and my story about my father's life together. But of course, they were significantly intertwined completely. And so we had the early history of my father, which is really extraordinary, an extraordinary life of privilege. He lived in a very wealthy family with chauffeurs and holiday houses and loving parents, but not knowing anything about Judaism. And then he had his Holocaust life, which was beyond horrific. Then he was reunited with his father for a short time, and he died of throat cancer because he worked in a lot of tunnels and caves, and probably that brought his downfall. And he was only in his 40s when he died. And then he had to escape the communists twice. And the reason he had to escape twice is that with the money he got from his father when he'd survived the Holocaust, he smuggled his sister out when the communists were there after he passed away already. And he was really in charge. He was 19 and my auntie was only 14. So he became a father, de facto father for his own sister. And he smuggled her out. He didn't want to be part of one of the wealthiest families in Czechoslovakia. They'd already stolen all their holiday houses and their bank accounts, and he really didn't have anything there. He didn't want to suffer again. So he smuggled her out, but when he then escaped and he went to meet her, he couldn't find her. She was picked up by a truck driver on a street in the middle of nowhere, kept safe, and so he was beside himself. She was 14 years old. So we ran back into Czechoslovakia, met the Guardians again, got my mother's jewels and lots of valuables. They then, because they were custodians and trustees till he was 21, but they realized that he was leaving anyway. And then he ran with a good mate of his, and they were attacked at the border, and the mate was shot and murdered, and he threw everything away. He swam in a river and then was reunited with his sister. And then as a 19-year-old, a 14-year-old came as refugees to Australia to start his life again with a dependent sister and started his life here. But so I wanted to write that story. And of course, I knew his later life, and I knew what Mark referred to. He was one of the happiest people that you would ever meet. He loved every moment of his life. It was too short because he unfortunately had a tragic ending to his life on top of everything else as well. But the years that he was spared in his early 20s till he passed away at 77, but was crooked from 70, were wonderful in this country. But I do want to reflect on another comment, and then I'll open up maybe for questions. And as I said, if you're interested in this book, Mark, you just ask Mark for a copy, and I'll send Mark copies for all of you, and you can share that with me. I wrote the book also to fight anti-Semitism, a topic I don't need to tell you how much it consumes so much of us, and Royal Commission just finishing, etc. as well. I had Josh Frydenberg launch the book in my house. Mark was here with 300 people. And I got my grandkids to speak, and I got my children to speak, and Josh Frydenberg to speak, and my auntie to speak, which was really moving. So it was a wonderful event. And I want to reflect on something else that my father said to me, and he was very prescient and a very smart guy 30 years ago, so 15 years before he died. He said to me, you know, Tommy, he said, we've lived the golden era of Jewish prosperity in this country, Australia, but don't always think it'll be this way. Reflecting on his own history, that you never know what happens to Jewish people in terms of our history and our 3,500 years of persecution. And as you all know, we're the most hated people in history, right? It's the one consistent theme through our history. So he said to me, watch out. Don't always think it's going to be like that. And I always reflect to people, and something that you'll understand as loving people, Christian people of good faith and good values. But I said, and I often say this, and most people have never shared this with me, I said, if you want to destroy the Jewish people, you only have to do one thing to us, and that's love us. Because wherever you loved us, except for the religious groups like the rabbi, etc. as well, but the vast majority of secular Jews, we marry out. If you look what happened to us after the Spanish Inquisition, the Marrano Jews that escaped before they were murdered, they end up in China, of all places, in Shanghai, They assimilated with all the Chinese population there because they were smart men, and the Chinese mothers were very happy for their daughters to marry Jewish men. There were too many. So wherever you loved us in history, and let's face it, in America, arguably, we're on the verge of assimilating. And I'm sure the rabbis got views about secular people assimilating in Australia too, by loving us. We're loving people, right? And not all of us, of course, but, you know, there was a big threat to Jewish existence. Of course, a couple things to say about that is that, you know, the thing about, I want to reflect back, is that Israel, and you're all lovers of Israel, was not only born as a result of the Holocaust, but what is clear is that if Israel existed at that time, there would not have been a Holocaust, right? So for Israel, Israel is a safe haven for all Jewish and non-Jewish people that are decent, because, as you know, we have a 20% Arab population and a minority religious Jewish people, but people are, you know, are accepted there. That, but of course, mainly Jewish people of Jewish faith can always make aliyah there when circumstances are difficult. And of course, you probably know that there's been a lot of movement of aliyah out of Russia. There was 1 million Jews. Many Jews from France recently, and from England. Wherever there's anti-Semitism is on the boil, you know, that's where we are, where we can go today. And so I always say to people, to me, you know, being Jewish and being being Zionistic are together the same thing. You can't separate it, even though people try to separate it. And especially for me, like who was a Holocaust survivor, Israel is fundamental to my being and my existence. And Mark said I did meet him there. I go often, and I'm going there in a couple of weeks. I'm going in there October the 3rd, during October the 7th, Memorial time, to think about the October 7, and just before the elections, and after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, as Rabbi also alluded to. So that's my story. It is a book that's well written, and it's a book that covers an interesting journey of somebody that didn't know he was Jewish to suddenly being it didn't make any difference to Hitler whether you were Jewish or not, you know, whether you practiced or you didn't practice, whether secular or religious. All Jews were tarred with the same brush, and were all headed for extermination. It was just a question of time before we all would have been exterminated. But we weren't. And I think that I think our revenge is, of course, and my personal revenge is, of course, the beautiful family that I now have. Blended family, and again, probably because of it's blurred. Maybe I'll unblur this. I don't know if I can blur this. I'm not sure where to blur. No, I don't know where it is. Maybe more. Just what trouble.
Video setting, I think.
In the video. Okay, perfect. Let's do video setting. Video setting. Oh yeah. Choose the background. Blur my back. Okay, I'm going to unblur it. Okay, great. Okay, you've got it. Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much for that. So there's a couple extra photos which you can see better. That's my father and my mother. That's my family and my brother underneath, and a recent photograph of my whole family. And one of my daughters is married to a Catholic boy, but the kids are brought up Jewish, but they've got to learn to speak French. So again, back to my point, the rabbi won't want to hear that too much. She was married to a Jewish guy first up. He was the guy that found the book, really. So interesting irony, all that. But my children are brought up Jewish, and my other son-in-law is Jewish, and my other daughter's living with a guy that's Jewish as well. I just reflect back on a couple of photos which you didn't see very readily. That's the book, which is available. And there's the very important photos, which are quite unique. And I think one thing I reflect on about the uniqueness of a name in Auschwitz, and as you understood the Nazis, if anyone been to Auschwitz, you realize that there's shoes, but no names on them. There's hair, there's clothing. Nothing has a name in Auschwitz. That's what Hitler wanted. We would disappear completely, no names. And even that we defied him by history. Only a few suitcases are there with names. Most of the suitcases have no names. Because my father arrived in October 1944, very late on. It's one of the reasons why that name's still there. So even that we defined him, and that was able to give me my background to find the suitcase and to share that, write the book and share this journey with you. Thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you, Tom. That's great. Wonderful. Mark, you can ask a question if you want to. I think it's wonderful. We'd like to have a whole lot of your books for some of the things that we're coming up. The combat anti-Semitism in November. We also will be probably at the Jerusalem Post business event, Tom, that's also in November, I think, in Brisbane. So
Okay.
we'll have a stall there, I hope, and we'll be able to disseminate some of the stories, etc., as we meet with people all around the country. And I'd love to have one for all the members of the Israel Allies Caucus, which are the federal members of parliament that support Israel. It would be a great story to be able to hand them, don't you think, Mark?
Well, I just got another 100 books. I'll send you 50 and then I'll reprint it and then you can sort of share them amongst yourselves rather than keep them. If you share amongst your members, Mark, give me the best address to send it to and I'll send 50 suitcases with my blessing. So, and then you can contact me or Mark will send you my details. And anybody wants to follow up with me, you're very welcome to do it. There'll be an article in the Australian, an excerpt in terms of the books, and we're looking for more potential film out of it even as well. So there is a film in this because the history is quite unique in lots of ways, and it does touch lots of the things that are going on. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've probably taken enough time, but you can send questions to me if you want, or I can answer some questions now if people have got any questions. Mark and John, tell me how you want me to handle it.
Okay, so we've got a couple of minutes. Mark, if you got a comment or a question, if somebody else wants to ask something, please use the reaction button, put up your hand, and we'll give you a go at asking a question. We don't always have time for questions, and sometimes we just pass them on to the speaker later on to answer you directly if that's how you would like to have it. But over to you, Mark.
Tell me, while people are thinking, two things come to mind. What can you share about the event that we had at your house a couple of weeks ago about the Royal Commission and what can be repeated? And secondly, that Holocaust Museum that you helped start, I think it was in Scotland or the UK. I think that either of those.
Okay. Well, I think the thing is about my event. It was what I said to you, that we can't remain silent. We have to be proud of who we are. We have to speak up even when it's difficult to do so. And I think it's incumbent on all of us, all good people, Christian Judaic people, to do what we can do, to turn back the tide of anti-Semitism. And so I used that opportunity in my house to have Josh speak and to talk about the issues and to talk about what the motivation of writing this book, that maybe it can play some small part. Maybe somebody can read it that has different views and understand a little bit more about the history of the Holocaust and survival stories and what happened. As to the Nottinghamshire Museum, has anyone heard of the Holocaust Museum in Nottinghamshire? Okay, well, I need to tell you something about 4 of the most beautiful Christian people. I call them 4 Mother Teresa's on this planet. And I do want to mention this. Is that okay, Mark? But when I was in Rwanda, I'll give you a 1-minute story. I've got a lot of stories. And you'll tell me, John, if we're running out of time. When I was in Rwanda and I went to the Genocide Museum in Rwanda, there was an insert of the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, in Rwanda. And I said, this is crazy. I said, why is there an insert about the Jewish tragedy here in the Genocide Museum? And they said, oh, well, because the same 2 people that set up the Genocide Museum in Kigali in Rwanda were the same 2 people that set up the Holocaust Museum in Nottinghamshire. I said, I've been to England many times. I never knew there was a Holocaust Museum in England. I mean, obviously England wasn't occupied by the Nazis. I said, who the hell would build a Holocaust Museum in Nottinghamshire, which I never knew about? Of course, I went to London many times. They said there were 2 people, James Smith, and Stephen Smith. I said, strange name, are they Jewish? They said, no, they're not Jewish. I said, hang on a second, you're telling me two non-Jewish people set up a Holocaust museum in honor of what happened to the Jews in Nottinghamshire, and they set up the Genocide Museum in Rwanda. And they said, yes, that's correct. I said, look, I have to meet these people. I'll do whatever it takes. I want to hear this story. And so James Smith took the 3-hour train trip to London when I was there. My children were living in London at the time. My eldest daughter was there. And I said, James, tell me the story of your life. And he told me the story of, I broke down in tears. And I just try to give you a snapshot, and it's an incredible story. But I give it to you because you'll find it amazing. And you need to look it up after this. James Smith, Stephen Smith, S-T-E-P. You all have to circulate this story because it is one of the greatest Christian stories of contribution that I've ever heard in my life. And it basically goes like this. When James and Stephen were living in Nottinghamshire, their parents, the father was a Methodist minister and the mother was a headmistress, Abby and Marina. And they went to visit Israel, like all you've done, to visit the holy Christian sites like you've all done. But the boys were 11 and 13, a long time ago. And when they were in Israel, they said to the parents, what is this thing we're hearing about Holocaust? What's Holocaust? And the father explained what happened to the Jews. And they said, why have we never heard any of this at school? Why didn't any of this get explained? These 11 and 13-year-old kids. And he made some sort of explanation and said, why isn't there a museum? Why isn't there anything here about this? And how could this be that happened to the Jews? 6 million murdered and nothing in England. And the boys went back very uneasy, even young boys. And they went, and one became a doctor, James, the other did religious studies. And years later, they went back to Israel, two brothers again, many years later, and they went to the first Yad Vashem, the Memorial Museum. They walked out of it and said, that's it. We are going to build a Holocaust museum in Nottinghamshire. And we're going to lobby the English government to teach Holocaust studies.
Wow.
And I said, did you get Jews to help you? They said, we didn't know any Jews. I said, this is the most insane story I've ever heard in my life, ever. And let me tell you something. They built the museum almost with bricks and mortar with their own hands, with their trucks and with cake stalls. And I can tell you it's one of the most magnificent museums you've ever been to in your life, Holocaust Museum, built literally with their own hands and selling raffle tickets and cakes, etc., with it. And then they did get some Jewish contributors and they got some money from the government. And they got the government to agree to do Holocaust studies in primary school, which most people haven't done in most countries in the world. And let me tell you something. There's 30 or 40,000 kids going there every single year. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's in a farm. It was a parents' farm. They had no money. They had no money. And they smothered. The mother used to smother Holocaust survivors coming from London. They used to bring them on by train or by taxi, and they would come and speak to the kids there, and they would make afternoon tea and hug and kiss and love the Holocaust survivors like my father in this farm as they educated 30 or 40,000 people every single year. And they self-funded it all off the back of themselves. Let me tell you 5 more minutes after that, Steven Spielberg found out about it, went to visit them and said to Stephen Smith, will you please come to Los Angeles and help me build the Holocaust Museum in Los Angeles? And so he did, right? They built it. And then Steven Spielberg said, Stephen Smith, will you help run the Shoah Foundation, the most important Jewish collection of, maybe except for the Torah's obvious, but modern collection of important information, the testimony, the most important thing we have. So Stephen Smith did that for many, many years, right? Then Stephen Smith married a Jewish girl. Then Stephen Smith converted to Judaism. And he was in Melbourne last week with his new project, which you can look up, called Our Jewish Story. And if you look up the app, Mark, I've sent it to you. Mark can send it to you. And I've given my Jewish story. And now they want to collect 100,000 Jewish voices to fight anti-Semitism around the world. And so they've come to Australia and collected 50. They've started here. And so stay tuned. You can all get involved in that. And to have 100,000, and the National Library of Israel, which you may have been to, will be the custodian of 100,000 Jewish voices. And they've done the first 50. And I think mine was the second or third in the 100,000 to come. And you can follow my story, which again is about this book. So,
wow, that's fantastic, Tom. That's amazing. I'm now going to set Mark another task to find Stephen Smith, and we'll have him on the program at some stage. It'd be fantastic.
You have to hear his story. You have to hear his
Yeah,
Christian
we'd
story.
love to.
It was a Christian story. It's now a Jewish story. But
Yeah, that'd be great.
He will tell you. He will tell you the story. I mean, talk about. And so I tell you that's why I'm optimistic. That there are good people, amazing people, right?
Absolutely.
They're amazing people, right?
Yeah.
And that's what. Let's look at Boy George, right?
Yeah.
They're amazing. They're amazing people that defy everything. That's why we can't be silent. We have to be outspoken and, put anti-Semitism back where it belongs, on the fringes of society and not in the mainstream. So we can all do this. We can all do this, right? So use the book, spread that. Go and I'm giving you homework. I always give homework to people afterwards, John. Get Stephen Smith there. I'll come and help you in November if you need me on a stand somewhere. I am a good salesman.
Yep.
I'm happy to help spread the message. Look at the Jewish story app. I've sent that to Mark. He can circulate that as well, because that's very, very interesting, and you'll hear Jewish stories for you. Okay.
Wonderful. Rachel, you've had your hand up, so I'm going to give you a minute for a quick question of Tom, and then we'll move on to getting Matthew to share. So can you unmute, Rachel?
Yeah, thank you. It's not really a question, Tommy. What a fabulous story. I'm also the daughter of Holocaust survivors. I'm actually at Sydney Airport, so I'm sorry there's an announcement. Could you just show us the cover of the book long enough for me to take a screenshot of it to get the full title, please?
Okay, great. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's good.
And
Rachel,
hold it a bit closer, please. Thank you.
Rachel, just put your email in, and we'll send you a copy.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I know where Mark will tell me where everyone is, because I might just send them all to Mark and he can distribute and organize different things. So
I sent it to Mark.
One last thing I want to tell you, which is interesting. When I went to Auschwitz, I met the director of Auschwitz there, because obviously I think he was nervous that I wanted to ask for my suitcase back because of my father's suitcase. And you're not allowed it by the law of Poland. Everything in Auschwitz belongs in the archives and it's probably the right place. And I would have left that. I would not have taken the suitcase myself. I didn't feel it was right. But then they said, would you like to know more about the suitcase? And here's another interesting little anecdote. There's a number here, 1172, that has nothing to do with my father. There was a previous owner of this suitcase in Theresienstadt that probably died there. And we think it's a she. We found out the name of the person. So there was a previous person. And then when she died, and then my father had to report for the transport, they gave my father her suitcase. And he put the name on it and took it there as well. So it's another interesting anecdote. And that's the importance of history as well, of keeping the memory and the records of people all around the world. Everybody plays their part in that. I don't know if you know, there's more than 2 million visitors a year to Auschwitz, and most of them are Polish young kids, which is wonderful, right? If we're going to fight anti-Semitism, part of it's education, right? And so that's one way that perhaps we can win. So be positive, be positive. And my father's survival also tells me that if he could do it, then we're human beings are a tough lot. We can survive a lot. Is that right, Rabbi? So he knows there as well. So.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you, Tom. That's fantastic. Love to meet you personally and have a chat and have a coffee. Seeing I'm back in Melbourne now, so at some stage.
Happy to. I'll leave the meeting because my wife's signed me up to go and listen to some other Jewish activity tonight. So I'll say goodbye to you. Send all the books. God bless you all.
Wonderful.
Chag Sameach. Have a wonderful new year. Good and all the best. And thank you for your support and love, which we feel.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tommy.
Thank you. Great to have him with us. Fantastic. And for everybody else, I hope you enjoyed that. And there'll be many more who watch it on our YouTube channel, the replay, because every month we do post the copy of the meeting on our YouTube through David, and sometimes we get 200 and 300 people watching after the actual live event. But tonight, actually, Tommy was mentioning the song by Boy George. We might get a chance to play that at the end. We'll see how we go, David. Just get it queued up just in case. But I'm going to pass to Matthew Chivers now from Bridges for Peace, who's our good friend, been on our advisory board for many years and has just led a group across Israel and Poland. Over to you, Matthew. Give us an update on how it went, what happened, what were the highlights?
Well, thank you so much, John, and good evening to everybody. And Tommy's not here, but thank you, Tommy, for sharing an amazing journey. I think it's obviously not. I don't believe in coincidence. I think our two subjects and topics are timed very well. So, yeah, as John has said, Bridges for Peace, our CEO, international CEO, decided has been something he's been on his heart for several years to put together and get all the senior leadership of Bridges for Peace to do a Holocaust memorial journey. So it finally came together, and we launched off on the 7th of August for 12 days, starting in Berlin. We landed in Berlin, spent 3 days in Berlin, and we had 32 of us, a group of 32 of us all together from 9 different nations around the world, all the senior leadership of Bridges for Peace across the world, apart from South Africa. The South Africans weren't able to get a visa to get in, so that was very disappointing for them and for all of us, but just an amazing time. Look, the reality of it is, and we toss this around a lot, there's no words to describe the feeling, the emotion, the heartache, the heartbreak of standing in the places where these horrendous, as I said, not enough words to describe what took place. But there's quite a lot of things that stand out, and probably as I share this over the next 6-12 months, everything I'll share will probably change, because the impact of it will change as I share and as I go over where we went and what took place, and how we enact and put into practice and put into action, as Tommy said, not staying silent. I think that's the greatest thing, is that we, as Christians, each and every one of us, not just those in positions like ours, leading organisations or being, active parts of organisations, doing stuff, but each and every person has a responsibility, especially as Christians, to stand up and stand with Israel, to stand with the Jewish people, our brothers and sisters, and say, not on our watch. It's not on our watch, and I think that's just something that's been resonating with me, that we have to do all we can. I have to do more than what I've been doing. I want to do more, and how we implement that obviously is the key. But we started our journey in Berlin, as I said. We met with a Holocaust survivor, was one of the first things we did, because our tour guide, Agatha, who put it together, what an amazing lady she is. She's a Polish Jew, married to a Jewish man. Her story is amazing. She converted to Judaism, and then found out later that she was born a Jew. So she's a double Jew. She said she's a double Jew. She's Jewish twice, so which was quite interesting. But look, such a fountain of wisdom and knowledge and understanding of the whole scene. And she just did an amazing job putting this together. It was intense. We, we're getting back into the motel, and 7:30, 8:30, 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, a lot of time in the bus. But we spent an hour with Holocaust survivor Irene Bindel, and what an amazing story she had. But one of the focuses of the tour was not just to, dwell on the negativity, the darkness, the death, the horrendous things that went on, but also see the light and the resilience of the Jewish people, and how different events and different things brought hope, and speak loudly today. I'm going to jump right almost to the back, and one of those things is in a little town. Obviously my Polish is terrible, but Auschwitz, and it's there's a synagogue there that survived the war, because the Germans used it as a munitions warehouse. But there's only one Jewish resident in the whole town, and there's a synagogue. And up until just recently, there was no Jewish residents in the town. But there's this synagogue that is active, and it's open, it's useful, and they hold different events and things at this synagogue. And that really just spoke to me so loudly, and I shared it with our group, of the importance of things like that, because it's not about today, it's not always about now, it's about the future, it's about the message it sends of hope, of life and prosperity and the blessing of God, that even though you would say, well, why is there a synagogue in the place where there's no, only one Jewish person? That's today. We don't know what tomorrow holds, and it's a beacon that is shining bright and sending a very loud and clear message, which is something that I'm sure resonates with all our hearts. But obviously, we went to all the major sites, but the thing I guess that really hit me very hard, and I think maybe we're not all aware of, but we think of the Holocaust in two things that I think is something that I think we need to build on, and maybe we can use a little more powerfully in our message. We think of the Holocaust and the Second World War with the Holocaust as almost exclusively as Jewish people that were killed. And yes, there was 6 million Jewish people, and I don't want to diminish that in any way. However, a fact that I think the world needs to know, especially the anti-Semites and those who think that they'll be spared because they're not Jewish, there was a lot of other people that were, Germans, Poles, Russians, that perished in the Holocaust in very similar ways to the Jewish people, simply because they didn't fit the narrative of the people perpetrating the Holocaust, perpetrating the cleansing of society. And that's very similar to what we have going on today. I think there's a lot of people out there that think they're going to be immune to what's coming because they're not Jewish or they're not Christian, but they might be in for a rude shock because, they don't fit the narrative of those who are pushing the agenda. And so that's one thing. But also the fact that all this started long before the war. And that was something I was very much unaware of. In 1933, they built the first labour camp, and then another one in 1936, housing tens of thousands of people, seeing lots of people. Now, they weren't death camps. People weren't sent there to necessarily be exterminated or put to death, but they were sent there to be worked to death for the Nazi German regime. And this is when Germany was still obviously a democratic country, holding elections and so forth in whatever, way you might look at that. And that was long before the war started. And so this ideology, this extremely cruel, barbaric, evil agenda was already in full swing. And that was something that hit me very profoundly. We visited a Jewish cemetery, just phenomenal, 80 acres, over 100,000 tombstones. And just the story, and I avoid cemeteries. I don't like cemeteries at all. I think they're terrible places, really, with death. And however, walking through there, and many of us said the same thing, you could spend hours or days there. The history, the life that is represented in those tombstones shouted out loudly and just drew you in to want to be part of it and experience it, which is, probably for me the exact opposite to what I think a cemetery would do. And but then, going to the concentration camps, we traveled to Warsaw on day 3. We spent the bulk of our time, obviously, in Poland. We went to a memorial. I can't think of the name of the place, and I would get it wrong if I tried to say it anyway. And this is, I think, something that we really need to ponder, of how evil ideologies infest, is probably the right word, people, because there was a little village of 2,000 people. Only less than 400 Jewish people lived in this village. They'd been there for generations. And for some reason, the Polish people, this wasn't Germans, these were Polish people, they turned on their neighbours. They herded them into sorry for crying, but they herded them into a barn, set them on fire, set the barn on fire and burnt them all. They were so gripped by the ideology. They were so gripped by fear and greed and all sorts of human emotions. I mean, I can't begin to imagine that they just felt that it was their duty, or if they didn't, they would suffer because they didn't, or whatever it was, that they burnt their friends, their neighbours, the people that their children played with and went to school with. They got children on pitchforks and threw them in if they had missed them after the initial roundup. Such was the evil that was perpetrated and that people gave themselves to. And these were the experiences we had, and trying to put words to those things is obviously nigh on impossible. But then obviously going to Treblinka and seeing the memorial and the stones and all the monuments and the remembrance there, and hearing the story of how the train would come and drop people off and all these things. But the overriding thing, I think, for me too, was how the whole perpetration of the Holocaust and the ideology from the Nazis and from Hitler down, the use of language, which is what we're seeing today, the perversion of language, the use of language in such a distorted way. They never once called or mentioned the extermination of the Jews. They used terminology like the Jewish problem, the Jewish question. They used, when talking about, sending them to their death, they used terms like removal, deportation, relocation, expulsion. They never once said, and used terms directly that you would directly associate with death and killing of people. And this was from the top down. There was no record of, there was very little record of even anything being signed by Hitler himself or others. And they found very little of that sort of evidence. It was almost like they knew they were going to get caught, so leave as little evidence as possible. No paper trail, so to speak. Like you hear today, there's no paper trail, so we can't prosecute them. And the language and the deception, the length of the level of deception they went to it beggars belief to really try and tap into what they're actually thinking. Whether I think that's been by eyewitnesses and by historians and people who have really dug into Hitler and the whole process. They've found there was a lot about crowd control and keeping the illusion that they were just moving the Jewish people in particular from one place to another. And, so much so that when they were sending them to the gas chambers, they would walk them down a tunnel and they had hooks like you would find in the showers or, in a gym where you would hang your clothes so that after you had the shower, you would come out and get your clothes and put them back on and things like that, so that, the people weren't panicking. And, on the other side, as I said about the non-Jewish people, one of the camps, they exterminated 10,000 Russians in 10 days, 10,000 Russian prisoners of war. And how they did that was the same. They told them that they were going to have their ID taken. So they measured their height, their weight. Then they got them to pose for a photo. While they were posing for the photo, there was there was a hole in the wall just behind them, and they would shoot them in the back of the neck and kill them. Every 3 minutes, this was happening for 10 days straight. The next person coming in never heard the shot, never saw the blood, and they thought they were getting their photo and ID recorded. And the same with the numbering system, the degradation of the erasing of identity, the shaving of the heads, the shaving of the bodies, and all the hair being removed and stripping down to, everybody being the same. The tattoos, even disguising that with, reusing the numbers over and over again many times, so that, you couldn't just add up the number and think, well, we found this person and their number was 1,435,000. That never happened. They designed that they would only use a certain amount of numbers and they would just keep reusing them. All these things that, added to the illusion. And every advancement they made, it was just, phenomenal to see. And how they got everybody to participate, it bewildered us. But I was constantly in tears. And, you walk in and you see a room, a room where they've got 40,000 pairs of shoes all, on display, so you can see what that looks like. And when the Russians liberated Auschwitz, Birkenau, they found, I believe it was 5 tons of human hair. There's a room in there that you visit, and it's got 2 tons of human hair just in one big pile. Just incomprehensible things and the depth of depravity, when you hear the accounts of what took place and the way those who committed these things enjoyed it. and I'll finish with this. We had the privilege of going into Rudolf Hess, the commandant of Auschwitz, his house. The tour guide who took us around, she started a foundation, Combating Anti-Semitism Foundation, and they've just purchased the house because a neo-Nazi group wanted to purchase it. So they acted quickly and got it before them. And so they now own the house. They don't want to set it up as a museum or things like that, but they want to just use it as a education facility to combat anti-Semitism. And they've called it House 88. They don't want to call it the House of Hess because they don't want to give him any recognition, but they call it 88 because 8 is obviously H and HH, Heil Hitler. It's a way they believe they're taking the name out of the German regime, like the Germans tried to take the names off the Jewish people and the victims of the Holocaust by giving them a number.
Yeah.
And so we got the privilege of walking through there, which not many people get to. We went down the tunnel. He had a tunnel that went down under his house into the prison camp. We got to go down into that tunnel. It's blocked off at the wall. You can't go through, obviously, but you could see the tunnel and the wash basin and everything where he would go in and rape prisoners and do all sorts of horrendous things and then come back in, wash himself up and off and pretend like, nothing had happened and life goes on. And I'll end with this in that, as I said, there's so much I could share and I'm all over the shop. We visited synagogues. We visited one of the highlights I just got to mention is that we visited the JCC, the Jewish Community Centre in Krakow, near Krakow. And what an amazing journey that is. Beautiful, beautiful people just doing an amazing job, sharing how it's just grown and grown and grown, and the people come in and just the relationship that is building with the surrounding community. There was a distinct difference in the atmosphere from obviously Germany into Poland, which is evident in the statistics of the crime rates and so forth. But Rudolf Hess's wife and their children, when they moved to the house, which is only 150 meters from the gas chamber, they could see the gas chamber. They could see the people being marched to the gas chamber out the window. There's actually a photograph taken of one of the boys looking out through the window as he watched the Jews go to their deaths. Rudolf Hess's wife described her when she moved to this house next to the death camp. Her words were, "This is paradise." Such was the depravity and their attitude towards the Jewish people. And so, yeah, I don't know whether I've shared anything of any use or of any great value, but as I said, I could go on for a long time, but I will keep it short. And, yeah, so thank you for the opportunity to share. But I recommend, if you get a chance to go, please go. Obviously you could spend a long time there, but I'm so passionate about this. I'm adding it to our tour of Israel from now in the future. I want to add a few days, go to Poland first, visit Auschwitz and a couple of the sites, obviously not like we did, but just a few days, and then go on to Israel after that and call it, something along the lines of from tragedy to triumph and the resilience of the Jewish people.
Yeah, I think that's...
So thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Fantastic. Obviously a very, traumatic, but in some respects, journey that you've been on. But
Absolutely.
I think you summed it up in the last words, from tragedy to triumph, and what the nation is now, and how it leads the world, and how it's been blessed, and how it is a blessing.
Absolutely.
For other nations, no matter how much they're persecuted, etc. It's really interesting. Look, I just want to say thank you, Matthew. That was great. Wonderful. I'm sure there'll be a processing of those things that you've been through, and probably in 6 to 12 months' time, we'll get the reflections of the wisdom that you've been through. But that was really, really good. So I've pre-warned people who have a shofar, please go and get it now, because we want to finish with the rabbi, the positive message of who we are as one, and Jew and Gentile together, and where we're going and where Hashem has got us. So, Rabbi, I'm just going to pass to you, and you can finish off and lead us with the shofar.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you, everybody. I must share with you this evening, I've actually seen divine providence and seen the hand of God, because this morning at 10 o'clock, those of us who are on the SCAFI committee, through a comedy of errors, had realised we have not confirmed a very eloquent speaker, Professor Dunn. And we were struggling, what are we going to do? Who's going to be the second speaker? What is plan B? And I think it was John says, hang on a second, I think Matt Chivers has just got back from Poland. Let's hear what he has to say. And truly remarkably, we had two speakers today speaking with different voices, yet really sharing that same message. And that message is that good men must not remain silent, because evil flourishes when that happens. And the second message also came out very clear, the triumph that came after terrible, terrible, terrible adversity. That ultimately, through that story now of Tommy's father's suitcase, his story, the message of the Holocaust, the message of resilience is going to be retold once again, and certainly Matt, who has been totally inspired, will now include this journey through the death camps on the Israel tour. So two very positive messages. Truly, if one reflects about it, this is actually the story of the shofar. If you look at every single shofar, it's narrow at the beginning, and yet there are some twists and turns, and ultimately it opens up. This has always been the story of the Jewish people. There has been challenges. There has been adversity, but ultimately we will triumph. We will be victorious. Not only will we survive, but we will thrive. So let me begin. I will just do the introductory notes, then the last final note, the Tekiah Gedola, that blast of hope, that blast of victory, that blast that should herald in a good and sweet new year. We will all do that together. So wait for the conclusion, and please have your shofars ready. Okay, are we ready? Tekiah Gedola, the final blast that will herald in.
Unmute, and blow.
I'll unmute everybody, and we should have a good and sweet new year. Am Yisrael Chai.
Beautiful.
A good and sweet new year.
Beautiful. Thank you. Bless you. Shalom to everybody till next month. What a
Shalom and blessings, everybody.
yeah, blessings.